Ever feel like life is a rigged game? You wake up earlier, stay later, and give 110%, yet your progress remains stagnant. Why does it feel like the harder you row, the further the shore gets? It's sickening to watch someone work 6 hours and out-earn your brutal 12-hour shift. You're trading your health for penny, while they're trading strategy for gold. If sheer effort was the secret to success, you'd already be at the top, but you're just tired of being tired with nothing to show for. That burnout isn't a badge of honor. It's a warning that your system is broken. But what if the system isn't just about your job? What if you are failing because you are carrying a weight that was never meant for your shoulder? Today, we're ending the grind and starting the strategy that will save your future. This realization is the bridge between being a slave to labor and a master of leverage. However, before you can master that leverage, you must discover the fatal error hidden in a story of a man who almost let his own determination drown him. There is a specific reason why your axe feels so dull, and it's something most people realize far too late. Ever feel like you're running a race on a treadmill that's stuck on high? You're out of breath, your heart's pounding, but the scenery hasn't changed an inch. It's beyond frustrating to watch others glide past while you're giving it your all. Let's be real. If sheer sweat was the secret, every donkey would be covered in gold. We've been fed this hard work lie since we were kids. Just keep your head down, they said. But working yourself to the bone without a strategy is just a recipe for burnout. You're waking up at the crack of dawn and grinding until you're numb, yet the needle on your success gauge barely budges. It's like trying to fell a massive oak tree with a butter knife. You get nothing but painful blisters because your tool isn't the right one. But what if the wrong tool isn't just your work ethic? What if the real reason you're failing is a weight you don't even realize you're carrying? You're pouring high-octane fuel into a car with no wheel, expecting to win. In the moment, I'm going to introduce you to Thomas, a man who was the poster child for this hustle, and show you the exact moment his determination almost became his death sentence. There is a fatal error he committed that you are likely repeating right now, and it has nothing to do with how many hours you work. Thomas was the kind of man who'd look at a mountain and decide to climb it sideways, just to prove a point. He didn't just row his boat to the usual spots. He pushed miles further into the choppy, heavy salt, believing the burning in his lungs was the only true indicator that he was earning his keep. To Thomas, exhaustion wasn't a warning. It was a badge of honor. Look at his hands. They were a gnarled map of deep scars, thick calluses, and fresh, angry blisters. Every morning, he'd wrap them in rough rags, gritting his teeth as he gripped those heavy oars again. He genuinely believed that the more his back ached at sunset, the more he deserved from life. He'd row past others and mutter, "Lazy bunch," feeling superior in his suffering. But Thomas was making a mistake that is likely draining your bank account and your soul right now. He mistook constant motion for actual progress. He was so busy rowing that he never actually stopped to check his empty nets. He thought that if the results were small, the only answer was to row further and suffer. What Thomas didn't realize, and what you might be missing, is that there is a ghost weight attached to those oars, a weight that makes every stroke twice as hard and half as effective. Do you know what happens to a man who relies solely on his willpower when he finally encounters someone who doesn't use oars at all? In the next section, you'll see the gap of mystery that left Thomas questioning his entire reality. Then there was Richard, a man who seemed to treat the sunrise like a suggestion rather than a starting pistol. While Thomas was already miles out and panting, Richard was usually found on the shore, calmly finishing a cup of tea. He watched the tides with a quiet intensity, as if he were reading a book that no one else could even see. Around noon, when the heat was punishing, Richard would finally push his boat into the water. He didn't row like a madman. He moved with an effortless grace. He'd be gone for only 3 or 4 hours, while others scoured the surface for any scrap they could find. But when he returned, the shock was undeniable. His boat sat so low in the water, you'd think it was about to sink under the weight of the prize. He wasn't bringing in bony scraps. He had the rarest, most expensive fish the sea had to offer. He was bringing in 3 times the value of Thomas's catch, while spending only a fraction of the energy. It didn't make sense to the hustlers who believed more hours always meant more money. Richard wasn't working harder, he was operating on a level of strategy that the others couldn't even fathom. But what was Richard actually reading in those tides while Thomas was bleeding for his oar? It wasn't just a fishing secret, it was a way of living that refused to carry the burdens that exhaust the rest of the world. In a moment, the weather is going to change, and you will see the exact moment where Thomas's hard work becomes his greatest enemy. There is a breaking point coming that every high achiever fears. And it's the only thing that can force a man to finally drop the stones he's been carrying. Then came the season of the Great Migration, when the currents shifted and the fish vanished into the icy deep trenches. While the average fisherman retreated, Thomas saw this as his moment to prove he was the hardest worker on the coast. He decided that if the fish were further, he would simply row twice as hard and sleep half as much to reach them. It was the ultimate test of his grit. But nature doesn't care how much you want it if your method is fundamentally flawed. He pushed his body past every red line, his muscles screaming in a language of pure agony. It was like trying to cut down a redwood with a plastic spoon, exerting maximum force for a microscopic result. He ignored the warning signs, convinced that if he just swung faster, the wood would eventually give way. But the sea is an unforgiving mirror. It reflects your lack of strategy back at you with every empty net you pull. One afternoon, miles from safety, the inevitable happened. Thomas's body finally staged a total shutdown. His oars slipped from his numb, bleeding fingers, and he collapsed into the bottom of the boat, gasping for air, while his unstoppable willpower proved to be a very finite resource. There he was, drifting aimlessly, a broken man whose only tool was a level of effort that had failed him. But here is the terrifying truth. Thomas wasn't just exhausted from the rowing, he was being dragged down by an invisible weight he hadn't yet identified, a weight that most people carry until they drown. Do you know what that weight is? It's the same one currently making your nets feel so heavy and empty. In the next chapter, Thomas faces the most painful moment of his life, which reveals the one thing you must let go of before you can ever truly succeed. Thomas dragged his boat back to the shore, his legs shaking like a newborn colt's under the weight of his own failure. He walked home with his head low, the salt crusting on his skin, feeling more like a heavy suit of armor than a residue. There's a special kind of sting when you've given everything you have, and the universe just hands you back a handful of nothing. It wasn't just his body that was broken, it was the entire belief system that had fueled his life for decades. He looked at his children, their eyes scanning his empty hands, and realized that trying hard doesn't put bread on the table. The stubborn pride that used to make him mock the lazy one was now a bitter, cold lump in the pit of his stomach. He had been swinging his dull axe with the fury of a giant, but the massive tree hadn't even lost a single piece of bark. But why did he keep swinging? Because he was terrified that if he stopped, he'd have to face the truth, that he was carrying weights, stone, that were never his to carry. The next morning, Thomas didn't reach for his oar. He walked toward Richard and finally whispered, "I've rowed further than any man alive, yet my nets are empty and my family is cold." He admitted that his raw strength was a currency that no merchant in the world was willing to accept any. Richard just patted the sand, ready to show Thomas why he had been pulling at the ocean with a net full of holes. But the secret Richard is about to reveal isn't just about fish. It's about a mental prison you are likely living in right now. Do you know the 3 specific stones that are draining your energy before you even start your day? Most people find out only after it's too late to change. Richard pulled a section of his net toward Thomas, and for the first time, Thomas actually looked at it. It wasn't the heavy, tangled mess Thomas used. It was light, weighted with surgical precision, and every knot served a specific purpose. Richard handled it like a master violinist, with deep respect for the tool that did the heavy lifting. "Look closely, Thomas," Richard said softly. "Your nets are wide enough to catch a whale, but the fish you're after are slipping through like ghosts. You've been rowing like a titan, but you're exhausted from pulling the weight of the entire ocean, not the pride. Think about that. You are working 10 times harder just to fight against the very medium that should be feeding you. Most people are out there swinging a dull, rusted axe against a hardwood tree, wondering why they're only getting sawdust. They think more force will compensate for a blunt edge, but all it does is ensure they'll be too tired to eat. But here is the secret Richard whispered next, the one that changes everything. Your axe isn't dull because you're lazy. It's dull because it's chipped by the weight of stones you were never meant to carry. You are pulling a net full of holes because you've let other people's expectations tear the fabric or focus. But how do you start mending those holes? And what is the law of leverage that allows a rested man to outperform a dying? I'm about to reveal the 3 pillars that will stop the leak in your life. But first, you must understand why your blisters are actually a symptom of a very expensive misunderstanding. Richard then sat Thomas down to explain the 3 pillars of a life built on design, not desperation. First, he introduced system. Think of this as building a net that works for you even when you aren't looking. In our world, this is the magic of automation, building a pipe instead of manually carrying buckets of water for the rest of your life. If you don't find a way to generate value while you rest, you will be forced to work until the day you finally close your eyes. Next is focus, or finding the current. You don't need to scour the whole ocean, you just need to be in the 20% of the area where 80% of the results live. It's about mastering the specific skill that turns every minute of your time into pure gold. Finally, the hardest pill to swallow, strategic rest or the shore. Time spent sharpening your axe isn't lost time. It's the most profitable part of your week. Real pros know that a rested mind sees the shortcuts that a panicked, exhausted mind will always walk right past. But here is the catch. You can't build a system or find your current if your hands are still full of those heavy stones, the guilt, the yeses you should have said no to, and the burdens of others. Your blisters are not a sign of honor. They are a symptom of an expensive misunderstanding. So how do you actually start dropping those stones without feeling like a failure? There is a specific audit that Richard taught Thomas, a way to look at your life and see exactly where you are pulling water for nothing. In a moment, you'll see Thomas take a step so radical his neighbors thought he had lost his mind. And it's the same step you'll need to take to finally see the results you've been promised. Thomas then took a radical step that felt like a sin to his old self. He simply stopped. For 3 full days, he didn't touch an oar, ignoring the frantic hustle voices in his head, screaming that he was falling behind. Instead of grinding, he spent his mornings studying the tides and the patterns of the gull. He finally understood that strategic observation is a higher form of labor than mindless daily perspiration. He began rebuilding his gear, not just fixing a net, but engineering a specialized system for high-value results. He was finally sharpening his axe, ensuring that his next single swing would cut deeper than 1,000 dull ones. He even rigged a simple sail, a tool of leverage that used nature's energy to do the heavy lift. His neighbors mocked him as they rowed past, calling him a lazy philosopher stuck on the sand. They couldn't see the maps he was drawing or the way he was calculating the turn of the tide. But Thomas wasn't avoiding work. He was refining his impact so that every second would actually count. He was learning to let go of the rowing so he could master the sailing. However, there was one thing Thomas had to discard before his boat would even float with the new sail: a set of heavy, useless stones he had kept in the hull, just because that's how it's always been done. Do you know which stones in your own life are making your new systems fail before they even start? There is a specific reason why even the best strategy won't work if you haven't mastered the art of letting go. And what happened when Thomas finally hit the water will prove it. The sun hadn't even reached its peak when Thomas's boat glided back into the harbor, while the other rowers were still miles out, sweating buckets under a punishing sun. Thomas looked like a man who just enjoyed a pleasant afternoon stroll across the water. He wasn't gasping for air or leaning over his oars in a state of total physical collapse. When he docked, The wooden planks were groaning under the sheer weight of a massive haul. He had caught 40% more than his best hustle days, using only half of his usual energy. He hadn't fought the sea, he had simply invited the right fish into his precision system. His hands were smooth, his back was straight, and his results were finally undeniable. Every hour he spent on the shore, sharpening his strategy, was worth 10 hours of mindless backbreaking rowing. He had traded the blunt trauma of the grind for the razor-sharp efficiency of the wise. But as he looked at his king's ransom, he realized the most important lesson of all. The superior result didn't come from a new net alone. It came because he finally had the courage to empty his boat of the heavy, useless stones he had been carrying for years out of habit and guilt. What would your life look like if you returned to the harbor of your home every day with a full net and a rested spirit? Most people think they need a bigger boat, but they actually just need to stop carrying the weight of an ocean that isn't theirs. But there is one final secret to Thomas's victory, a specific mental shift that allowed him to say no to the old way of suffering. And it's the exact shift I'm going to share with you right now. The world doesn't pay you for the intensity of your sweat. It pays for the results you bring back to the shore. Being busy is frequently just a shield, a way to avoid the hard, deep thinking required to change your life. If you are perpetually exhausted but stuck in the same place, you aren't a hero, you're just swinging a very dull axe. It is time to stop glorifying the struggle and start mastering the hidden law of leverage. The legendary 1% aren't working 20 times harder. That's physically impossible. They simply use better tools, smarter systems, and they keep their blades razor sharp by knowing what to leave behind. You have a choice today. Keep rowing until your spirit breaks, or stop and build a better. But here is the truth that Thomas finally realized. You can't sharpen your axe if your hands are too full of stones to hold the whetstone. You've been trying to outmuscle the entire ocean while carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations, and that is why you are drowning. I've shown you the what and the why, but the how requires a level of surgery on your schedule and your soul that most people are too afraid to perform. Are you truly working hard, or are you just afraid to sit still and realize how much of your burden isn't even yours? In just a moment, I'm going to show you the exact map that will teach you how to identify these stones and drop them once and for all before they pull you under for the last time. Stop for a second and look at your own hand, not just the physical, but your spirit. Are they covered in blisters because you're winning, or just because you're stubborn? Swinging a dull axe with more force doesn't make you a hero. It just makes you a casualty of your own ego. It's time to stop the noise, put down the oar, and finally start the strategy. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. Like Thomas, you might be rowed into exhaustion not by the work itself, but by the stones in your boat. The expectations of others, the guilt of saying no, and the pain of carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created a specialized tool to help you navigate back to the shore. The ebook, The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours. This isn't just a book, it's your manual for building the net that actually catches the prize. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and finally live with the lightness that Richard and the new Thomas discovered. When you grab your copy today, I'm also including 2 essential navigational tools as bonuses. Bonus 1, Learning to Let Go. This is the deep dive strategy on how to identify which stones are yours and which belong to the ocean. Bonus 2, When Saying No is an act of self-love, the blueprint for setting the boundaries that protect your sail from being torn by the winds of other people's demand. I want you to audit your schedule for this coming week with brutal honesty. Ask yourself, am I actually moving the needle, or am I just making a lot of splash in the water? Don't let your friends drown in the grind while you finally found the sail. The link to claim your ebook and all the bonuses is in the description and in the pinned comment below. It's time we all stopped rowing blindly and started winning by design. The world doesn't reward you for how tired you are at sunset, but for the value you bring back to the shore. Stop pulling water. Start your strategy today.